Listen closely. Can you hear it? That sound like silk being torn underwater. That's the sound of a man discovering his greatest power isn't in pursuit, but in the art of magnificent disregard. There's an old Romanian folk tale about a prince who fell so deeply in love with the moon that he built a tower to reach her. Each night, he climbed higher, his fingers bleeding against the stones, his breath forming ice crystals in the thin air. The moon watched, amused at first, then bored, then contemptuous. But the night he stopped climbing, the night he sat at the base of his tower and read poetry by candlelight instead, that was the night she descended, curious about this sudden, terrible silence where worship used to live. Women don't crave money, though they'll tell you they do. They don't even crave love, though they'll die believing it. What they crave, what makes their pupils dilate and their breath catch like moths against glass, is the unbearable weight of being unnecessary. The exquisite torture of mattering to someone who has discovered they don't need to matter at all. Picture this: a man sits in a leather chair that smells of tobacco and old libraries. The woman he once would have crossed oceans for sends him a message at 2 a.m. Something coy, something testing. In another life, he would have responded before she finished typing. His thumbs would have danced desperate algorithms of reassurance. But tonight? Tonight, he sets his phone face down and returns to his book. Schopenhauer's essays on the metaphysics of love. He sleeps dreamlessly. She doesn't sleep at all. This is the cathedral of indifference, and every woman knows its architecture by heart. They've walked its cold marble floors in their dreams, traced their fingers along its indifferent pillars. It's not cruelty they're drawn to. Cruelty still cares. It's the profound, almost holy disinterest of a man who has discovered that his attention is currency, and he's become beautifully, terrifyingly frugal. You see, Machiavelli understood something about power that modern men have forgotten in their desperate scramble for female validation. He wrote that it's better to be feared than loved, but what he really meant was, it's better to be sovereign than needed. The moment you stop needing her approval, truly stop, not pretend to stop while checking your phone every 30 seconds, you become something far more dangerous than a lover. You become a mirror that refuses to reflect. There's a study from Stockholm, 2024, where researchers measured cortisol levels in women whose partners suddenly withdrew attention after periods of intense pursuit. The spike wasn't just stress, it was fascination. Their brains lit up like slot machines, desperate to decode this new algorithm of absence. One subject, a successful attorney who hadn't cried in 3 years, sobbed in the researcher's office. I hate that I want him more now. I hate that his indifference feels like foreplay. But here's the grotesque beauty of it all. This isn't manipulation. This isn't some pickup artist's fever dream of false scarcity. This is what happens when a man genuinely discovers that the hollow between his ribs isn't meant to be filled by another person. It's meant to echo. Like a canyon that makes visitors whisper in awe, not because it's full, but because it's magnificently, unapologetically empty. I knew a man once, let's call him Marcus, who spent 7 years chasing a woman who treated his heart like hotel soap, useful, disposable, forgotten the moment she checked out. He wrote her poems that could make angels weep. He learned 3 languages because she mentioned them in passing. He became everything she said she wanted, a shapeshifter of dedication, a devotional chameleon bleeding rainbow promises. Then his father died. Not dramatically, just quietly on a Tuesday afternoon, leaving behind a note that said, "I spent 40 years trying to earn your mother's love. I should have spent them earning my own respect." Marcus stopped calling her, not as punishment, not as strategy, He simply stopped. He took up woodworking. He read Aurelius by candlelight. He learned to make bread that would make French grandmothers weep with envy. 6 months later, she showed up at his door at midnight, mascara running like black rivers, begging to know why he'd become so cruel. "I'm not cruel," he said, flour still under his fingernails. "I'm just full." And that fullness, that terrible, beautiful self-sufficiency, it drives women to the kind of madness that builds empires and burns them down for sport, because every woman carries inside her the ancient memory of Lilith, who didn't want Adam's rib, but his complete, undivided, desperate attention. And when she doesn't get it, when she realizes she's performing for an empty theater, that's when she either leaves forever or loves with the kind of ferocity that reshapes continents. The velvet curtains in my study smell like old perfume and disappointment. Sometimes I catch their scent and remember when I, too, was a beggar prince, building towers to the moon. Now I understand what Kierkegaard meant when he wrote that the most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have. But there's something almost holy in that pain, something that tastes like expensive whiskey and sounds like jazz at 3 a.m. Here's what they won't tell you in any relationship book. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's sovereignty. It's the moment you realize that your happiness isn't a democracy where she gets a vote. It's a monarchy, and you're the only one with a crown. Tell me something, and be honest, though I know you'll lie. When was the last time you went a full day without checking if she'd noticed your absence? When did you last eat a meal without wondering if she'd approve of your choice? When did you last wake up without your first thought being her name? If you can't remember, then you're still climbing that tower, bleeding against stones that don't care about your devotion. And she's up there, bored, waiting for you to discover what Marcus found in Flower and Solitude, that the most attractive thing you can become isn't her everything. It's your own anything. Every word you never said is preserved here in formaldehyde. There's a peculiar humidity tonight, the kind that makes mirrors fog and memories stick to your skin like wet leaves. Let me tell you about the most dangerous room in the world. It's not a torture chamber or a government black site. It's the space between two people at dinner when both are scrolling through their phones, desperately seeking in strangers what's dying across the table. Oh, in medieval Persia, there was a punishment worse than death. They would take two lovers who had betrayed the Shah and seal them in a room with no windows, only enough food for one. They weren't meant to kill each other. They were meant to watch their love eat itself alive, word by word, glance by glance, until nothing remained but two strangers who knew each other's every secret and wished they didn't. Modern relationships have recreated this torture voluntarily. We call it communication. A woman once told me, her wine glass trembling like a bird with broken wings, that she could trace the death of her marriage not through fights or affairs, but through the increasing delay between his responses. First seconds, then minutes, then hours, then that particular kind of silence that sounds like a flat line. "We talked every day," she said, mascara making Rorschach tests on her cheeks. "We just stopped saying anything." You want to know what women crave more than money? More than security? More than Instagram-worthy proposals? More than diamond promises they'll sell after the divorce? They crave the electric danger of being truly heard. Not listened to, but heard. The way a wolf hears a twig snap in the darkness and knows exactly what it means. But here's the delicious paradox that would make Nietzsche laugh until he wept. The very act of trying to be heard makes you invisible. The more you explain yourself, the less you exist. Every word you speak to justify your existence is another shovel of dirt on your own grave. I keep a collection of last text messages. Not mine. I'm not that masochistic. These are donations from the walking wounded, the relationship refugees who email me their pain at 3 a.m. Here's one from last Tuesday. I love you too. 4 words that managed to say nothing while admitting everything was over. Here's another. We should talk. The modern equivalent of a funeral invitation. There's a 2025 study from the University of Copenhagen that found couples who text more than 50 times a day are 73% more likely to report feeling profoundly alone than those who barely text at all. The researchers called it proximity loneliness, the special kind of isolation that comes from being constantly connected to someone who isn't really there, like being haunted by a ghost who's still breathing. But let me tell you about James. James was a philosopher who spent his evenings reading Kierkegaard and his days pretending to care about spreadsheets. He met Sarah at a bookstore, the last real one in the city, the kind that smells like dying dreams and fresh coffee. She was reading Anais Nin in the corner, and he fell in love with the way she moved her lips while reading, like she was tasting the words. For 6 months, they exchanged messages like Victorian lovers, each text a small masterpiece of wit and longing. They created a private language of inside jokes and shared sorrows. Their conversation was a living thing, a third entity in the relationship, fed daily with clever observations and digital kisses. Then James did something unforgivable. He stopped trying to be interesting. Not all at once. Evil rarely announces itself with trumpets. He just started responding with the truth instead of poetry. When she asked how his day was, he said tired instead of crafting a metaphor about feeling like a piano with half its keys missing. When she sent him songs, he'd like them instead of writing 3 paragraphs about how the bridge reminded him of her laugh. She left him on a Thursday, not because he'd stopped loving her, but because he'd stopped performing love. And that's the sick joke of modern romance. We don't want authentic connection. We want a beautiful lie that never breaks character. The Museum of Dead Conversations has infinite rooms. In one, you'll find the emoji that replaced I love you. In another, the read receipt that was never answered. There's an entire wing dedicated to conversations that happened entirely in subtext, where I'm fine meant I'm dying, and whatever you want meant choose wrong, and I'll never forgive you. Schopenhauer wrote that we're like hedgehogs in winter. We need the warmth of others to survive, but get too close and we'll pierce each other with our spines. But he was wrong about one thing. We're not hedgehogs. We're mime artists, performing intimacy behind invisible walls, our hands pressed against glass that doesn't exist, screaming without sound. I light another candle. Vanilla and regret, my favorite scent. The wax pools like all the words we swallow instead of speak. Sometimes I think relationships don't end with arguments or betrayal. They end with the realization that you've been having 2 different conversations all along, like parallel lines that look like they're touching, but never actually meet. Here's what's truly grotesque. Women don't want you to read their minds. They want you to read the negative space between their words, the silence that screams, the pause that pleads. They want you to understand not what they're saying, but what they can't bring themselves to say. They want you to be fluent in a language that doesn't exist, to respond to questions they'll never ask. And men? Men speak in code too, but it's Morse code while women are speaking in symphony. I'm going out with the boys means I need to remember who I was before you. I'm not hungry means I'm full of resentment. Sure, invite your mother means I'm keeping score and you're losing. Last week, I watched a couple at a cafe, married, based on the way they sat. Not across from each other like lovers, but side by side like cellmates. She showed him something on her phone. He nodded without looking. She put the phone away. They both stared straight ahead, and I swear I could hear their marriage flatlining. That long, sustained beep of something that was once alive. But then, and this is why I still believe in magic, he reached over and fixed a strand of her hair that wasn't out of place. She smiled, not at him but at her coffee, and for just a moment, they were speaking the same language. Not words, not even gestures, just the shared understanding that they were both drowning and had decided to hold hands while they sank. Tell me this, and don't think too hard about the answer. What was the last true thing you said to someone you love? Not kind, not cruel, just true. Can you even remember? Or have you been speaking in translations for so long that you've forgotten your native tongue? The Museum of Dead Conversations is open 24/7. Admission is free, but leaving costs everything you never said. Some men plant seeds, others become the soil. Have you ever noticed how the most broken men smile the widest? There's something obscene about it, like watching a marionette dance after its strings have been cut. Tonight, I want to tell you about the garden where nothing grows, where men go to bury the best parts of themselves and call it love. There's a Japanese legend about a merchant who loved a woman so deeply that he sold everything he owned to buy her gifts: his shop, his home, his father's sword. Everything transformed into silk and jade for her pleasure. When he had nothing left to sell, he began selling pieces of his soul. His laugh went first, traded for pearl earrings. Then his dreams, exchanged for rare perfume. Finally, his name itself, offered up for a wedding ring she would never wear. The woman accepted each gift with the same expression, pleasant disappointment. She was waiting, you see, for him to give her the one thing she actually wanted: his refusal. But modern men don't know this story. They think love is an economy where they must always be in debt. I have a neighbor, let's call him David, who waters dead plants. Every morning at 6 a.m., I watch him through my window as he tends to his garden of brown stems and withered leaves. His wife left 3 years ago, but he still maintains her garden with the dedication of a monk tending temple grounds. They might come back, he told me once, and I couldn't tell if he meant the plants or her. The saddest part? 2 weeks ago, I saw a green shoot pushing through the soil. He plucked it immediately, preserving the death she'd left behind like a memorial. This is what women crave more than money: the profound discomfort of watching a man refuse to die for them. Not live for them, any fool can do that, but refuse to die. Refuse to dissolve. Refuse to become fertilizer for their happiness, while his own soul grows brittle as chalk. You want to know the truth that would make Machiavelli vomit his wine? Every woman secretly despises the man who worships her. Not because she's cruel, but because worship is just fear wearing its Sunday clothes. And fear smells like a garden where nothing grows, where every emotion is carefully pruned to never upset, never challenge, never truly touch. The University of Heidelberg published a study in 2024 that should be required reading for every man who's ever said, "Happy wife, happy life," without irony. They found that women's attraction decreased by 12% for every major personal sacrifice their partner made for the relationship. But here's the twist that made researchers question their own data. Attraction increased by 8% for every boundary maintained, every no spoken without apology. One subject, a neurosurgeon who'd divorced 3 perfect husbands, explained it with chilling clarity. "I don't want someone who'd die for me. I want someone worth dying for. Let me paint you a picture that tastes like copper and sounds like rain on dead leaves. Marcus, remember him from before, had a friend named Thomas. Where Marcus found strength in solitude, Thomas found identity in servitude. He was the guy who drove to her apartment at 2 a.m. with soup when she was sick. She wasn't. The one who canceled plans with friends because she might need him, she didn't. He memorized her coffee order like scripture, celebrated the monthly anniversary of their first kiss, wrote her poems that would make Byronic heroes blush with embarrassment. She cheated on him with his brother. Not because his brother was better, he was objectively worse in every measurable way. Unemployed, uncommitted, smelled vaguely of gas station wine. But he had something Thomas had sold for the privilege of calling her mine. He had contempt. Beautiful, sovereign contempt for the very idea that any woman could improve or destroy him. Thomas forgave her, of course. Men who water dead gardens always do. He even apologized for not being enough, as if he could become more by becoming less. She left him anyway, but not before saying something so cruel it should be carved on every nice guy's tombstone. I wish you loved yourself even half as much as you claim to love me. Nietzsche wrote that when you stare into the abyss stares back. But he never mentioned what happens when you become the abyss. Empty, accommodating, infinite in your capacity to hold someone else's pain while your own echoes unheard. That's the garden where nothing grows. The space inside a man who's composted his own dreams to help hers flourish. But here's the secret wrapped in thorns and midnight promises. Some men are discovering the savage joy of letting gardens die. They're learning that scorched earth can be more beautiful than forced blooms. They're understanding what Schopenhauer meant when he said, the hedgehog's dilemma isn't about finding the right distance. It's about growing comfortable with your own spines. I burn sage in my study, not to cleanse, but to remember. The smoke curls like question marks, asking why we've confused sacrifice with love, why we've made martyrdom a masculine virtue. Sometimes in the smoke, I see the ghosts of all the men who gave themselves away piece by piece, thinking they were building something instead of excavating their own graves. There's an Italian phrase, Muoia Sansone con tutti I Filistei. Let Samson die with all the Philistines. It's about destroying everything, including yourself, for a cause. But modern men have perverted this into something worse, destroying themselves while everyone else thrives, then calling it nobility. A woman told me once, after her third whiskey, that the sexiest thing her ex-husband ever did was refuse to pick her up from the airport after she'd explicitly told him not to come. I was testing him, she said, ice cubes clicking like bones. Every other man I'd dated would have shown up anyway, roses in hand, apologies ready. But he just believed me, trusted that I meant what I said. Do you have any idea how terrifying that was? How attractive? The garden where nothing grows isn't empty by accident. It's empty because someone keeps poisoning the soil with their own dissolved bones, thinking calcium makes good fertilizer. But bones don't feed gardens, they haunt them. Here's my question for you, and I want you to feel it in your sternum, like a key turning in a lock you didn't know existed. What would you become if you stopped trying to become what she wanted? Not rebelliously, not spitefully, but with the simple, terrible grace of a man who's realized his soul isn't community property. Can you even imagine it? Or have you been cultivating dead gardens for so long that you've forgotten you were meant to be the storm, not the soil? Every reflection is a performance, and the audience left years ago. Sigh. You know what's funny about 3 a.m.? It's the only honest hour left. The rest of the day wears masks, but 3 a.m. strips naked and shows you its scars. Right now, while you're listening to this, someone is standing in a bathroom, staring at a mirror, practicing conversations they'll never have with a woman who stopped listening years ago. In ancient Greece, they had a word, enantiodromia, meaning the tendency of everything to become its opposite. Love becomes obligation, passion becomes routine. And that man in the mirror? He becomes his own ghost, haunting a life he's still technically living. Let me tell you about the theater of broken mirrors, where every man eventually performs his one-man show to an audience of none. Last month, I met a CEO. Let's call him Richard, because all broken kings should be called Richard. He had everything. The corner office with a view of other people's dreams dying. The car that cost more than most people's houses. The watch that could buy a small country's debt. But when he talked about his wife, his voice did this thing. This little crack, like ice forming over deep water. She hasn't really looked at me in 3 years, he said, adjusting his Hermes tie like it was a noose. She sees me, but she doesn't look. And then there it is. The difference between being visible and being witnessed. Women don't crave money or security or even those stupid love languages everyone memorizes like they're studying for a test they've already failed. They crave the electric moment when a man stops performing and accidentally reveals who he really is. But here's the cosmic joke. By the time most men stop performing, there's nobody left underneath. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote a play where a town becomes so corrupt that justice itself becomes a performance. That's modern relationships. We're all so busy performing intimacy that we've forgotten what it actually feels like. We're method actors who've been in character so long, we've forgotten our real names. A Stanford study from 2025 found something that should be printed on every wedding invitation. Couples who describe their relationship as perfect on social media are 67% more likely to separate within 2 years than those who never post about each other. The researchers called it performative decay, the slow rot that happens when you're so busy curating love that you forget to actually feel it. But let me tell you about the most haunting performance I ever witnessed. It was at a dinner party, the kind where everyone's trying so hard to seem successful that the air tastes like desperation and expensive cologne. This couple, married 15 years, were doing their routine. She'd set him up for his stories. He'd deliver the punchlines. She'd touch his arm at precisely the right moments. He'd refill her wine before she asked. They'd done this dance so many times they could do it unconscious, and they were. Then someone asked them how they met. They both started talking at the same time. Different stories. Completely different stories. She said bookstore. He said concert. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was archaeological, like we'd just unearthed something that should have stayed buried. They looked at each other, and for just a second, I saw it. Two strangers realizing they'd been sleeping in the same bed, acting out a play neither of them had written. They're divorced now, but here's what nobody talks about. They're both still performing the same roles, just with different co-stars. Because that's what the theater of broken mirrors teaches you, how to be anyone except yourself. Kierkegaard said that the most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly one you'll never have. But I think he was wrong. The most painful state is performing a past that never really happened, for an audience that's already gone home. I have a collection of suicide notes. Not real ones. I'm morbid, not criminally invasive. These are the messages men send themselves at 3 a.m. The ones they type and delete, like a prayer to no one. Here's one from last week. I've become the man she wanted me to be, and now neither of us knows who I was. Here's another. I'm homesick for a person I've never been. The theater of broken mirrors has infinite stages. On one, a man practices saying, "I love you," until it sounds convincing again. On another, someone rehearses the fight they're too tired to have. In the balcony, ghosts of who they used to be watch with detached amusement, wondering when the intermission became the entire show. But here's what Machiavelli would appreciate. Sometimes the greatest power move is to stop performing altogether, to let the silence stretch until it becomes its own language, to stop being the dancer and become the void the dance moves through. There's a Buddhist saying that you can't step in the same river twice. But modern relationships have proven you can't even step in the same mirror twice. Each reflection is a new performance, a new lie, a new attempt to be someone worth loving while forgetting you were already worth it before you started trying. The velvet curtains in my study are heavy with the scent of endings, vanilla candles and spilled wine, and that particular mustiness that comes from keeping windows closed too long. Sometimes I stand in front of my own mirror and practice being nobody. It's harder than you'd think. Even alone, we perform for the harshest audience of all, the man we thought we'd become. Tell me something, and this time let it hurt. When was the last time you did something without wondering how she'd react? When did you last have a thought that wasn't a rehearsal? When did you last look in a mirror and see someone you recognized? The theater of broken mirrors is showing the same play it always has. The man who loved too much and lost himself. Critics say it's repetitive. Audiences left years ago, but you're still performing, aren't you? Still hitting your marks, delivering your lines, waiting for applause that sounds suspiciously like silence. Where wisdom goes to die, and men go to be reborn. The candle flame flickers like a drunk philosopher trying to explain consciousness, certain of its existence, uncertain of everything else. It's 4 a.m. now, that liminal hour when the veil between who you are and who you could be becomes tissue thin. Let me tell you the final truth, the one that tastes like ashes and birthday cake. The one that will either destroy you or set you free. There's a library in Prague that no one talks about, not because it's secret, but because everyone who finds it wishes they hadn't. It's called the Library of Unlearned Lessons. Every book contains a truth someone died knowing, but never understanding. The shelves smell like regret and leather. And the silence is so complete you can hear your own blood lying to your heart about why it keeps pumping. I found myself there once, metaphorically speaking. Though the metaphor felt more real than my actual life, I picked up a book at random. Inside, one sentence repeated on every page in different handwriting. She loved you most when you loved her least, and you loved her most when you weren't you. This is what women crave more than money, more than security, more than all the promises you rehearse in the shower. They crave the man you were before you met them, the one they'll spend the entire relationship trying to destroy and resurrect simultaneously. But here's the blasphemous truth that would make even Nietzsche reach for a comfort blanket. You can't go back. You can't unlearn the dance. You can't unbecome the performance. But you can do something far more terrifying. You can become someone new. Someone who's learned the lessons but refuses to let them define him. Someone who's been broken and chose to rebuild with gold in the cracks, like Japanese kintsugi, more beautiful for having been destroyed. There's a study from MIT published just 3 months ago that discovered something horrifying and hilarious. Men who go through brutal breakups show increased activity in the same brain regions associated with spiritual awakening. The researchers didn't know what to make of it. But I do. It's the moment you realize that rock bottom has a basement, and in that basement, there's a door. And behind that door, freedom. Terrible, beautiful freedom. Let me tell you about Vincent. Not his real name. No one uses real names in stories about resurrection. Vincent was the perfect man. He'd read all the books, done all the therapy, learned all the love languages until he was fluent in emotional Esperanto. He cooked. He listened. He remembered anniversaries of first everythings. He was, in every measurable way, what women say they want. His wife left him for a man who forgot her birthday. Not because she preferred neglect, but because she was drowning in Vincent's perfection. Living with him, she told me at a bar that serves drinks strong enough to strip paint, was like being loved by an algorithm. Every response was correct. Every gesture was appropriate. But nothing was real. I left him for someone who could hurt me because at least pain proves you exist. Vincent heard this, secondhand, through the kind of friends who deliver cruelty wrapped in concern. And something in him, something that had been sleeping since he first learned to say "yes, dear" without thinking, woke up. He didn't become an asshole. That's the mistake most men make, swinging from doormat to dictator like there's nothing in between. Instead, he became something far more dangerous, authentic, inconsistent, unpredictable in the way that real humans are. He started saying no without explaining, yes without conditions. He took up boxing, not to become tough, but to remember he had a body. He read poetry, not to quote it to women, but to understand his own sadness. 6 months later, his ex-wife called. Not to reconcile. That ship had sailed and sunk and become a coral reef. But to tell him something. I don't know who you are now, but for the first time, I believe you exist. The Library of Unlearned Lessons has a section called Things You'll Only Understand After It's Too Late. Every book there is the same story told in different languages. A man spends his whole life becoming what someone else needs, only to discover that what they needed was for him to stop trying. Schopenhauer wrote that life swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. But he missed the third position, the moment of stillness between swings when you realize you don't have to be the pendulum. You can be the space it moves through. I pour myself the last of the wine. It tastes like endings and beginnings having a conversation in my mouth. Outside, the world is starting its morning lies. Birds pretending everything's fine. Sun pretending it's not dying. People pretending they're not performing. But in here, in this space between night and day, between who you were and who you're becoming, there's a terrible honesty available. Here's what Machiavelli knew but never quite said. The prince isn't about power over others. It's about power over yourself. The sovereignty to choose your own destruction and resurrection. The authority to decide which lessons to learn and which to leave in the library, gathering dust like love letters from someone you used to be. A woman asked me once after we'd both had enough whiskey to tell the truth, but not enough to forget it. What do men really want? I laughed until I cried, or maybe cried until I laughed. At 4 a.m., they're the same thing. Men don't know what they want, I told her, because they've spent so long wanting what they're supposed to want that they've forgotten they have preferences. But you listening to this in the darkness, feeling that familiar ache between your ribs where your authenticity used to live, you're starting to remember, aren't you? Starting to feel that ancient hunger for something real, even if it's real pain, real loneliness, real failure, anything but this performance, this parade of appropriate responses, this slow death by emotional committee. The Library of Unlearned Lessons stays open all night, but hardly anyone goes anymore. It's easier to keep reading the same script, keep performing the same show, keep watering the same dead gardens. But every once in a while, someone walks out of that library different than they walked in. Not better, different. Scarred but sovereign. Broken but unbound. They're the ones who understand the final paradox. Women don't crave men who need them or men who don't need them. They crave men who've transcended the question entirely. Men who've learned that love isn't a transaction or a performance or a sacrifice. It's what happens when two people decide to stop acting and start existing in the same space, terrible and honest and free. The candle dies with a sound like a secret being kept. In the darkness, I can hear my own heartbeat, steady and indifferent, pumping blood that doesn't care about any of this. And maybe that's the lesson. Your heart will keep beating regardless. The question is whether you'll spend those beats performing someone else's life or living your own. Here's my final question, the one that matters more than all the others combined. If you could unlearn everything you know about love, would you? Or would you keep the knowledge and use it to build something new? Not a garden, not a theater, not a cathedral, but a simple room where you could sit with someone and both be exactly who you are, terrible and beautiful and absolutely undeniably real. The choice, like all real choices, is yours. But choose quickly, dawn is coming, and with it, the return of all the masks you'll wear today. Unless, of course, you decide not to put them on. Unless you decide that today, finally, you'll be brave enough to be disappointing, brave enough to be real, brave enough to be free.